The morning alarm buzzed through Kepler Station like it did every day at 7 sharp. But for Lyra, that sound meant something different than it did for everyone else. While other students rolled out of their beds excited for another day of learning and friendship, Lyra felt her stomach twist into knots. Another day meant another 18 hours of being invisible, ignored, or worse. She stood in front of her small mirror, looking at her reflection. Her pale blue skin caught the artificial light from her room's ceiling panels. Back on her home planet, that same blue color was considered beautiful. Her grandmother used to tell her that their skin changed shades with their emotions, like living art. But here, on the station, that same blue skin made her a target. Lyra picked up her datapad and checked her work from the night before. Lines of mathematical equations filled the screen. These weren't just homework problems. They were something much more special, something that connected her to her people's history. Each number and symbol was part of a poem written in the ancient language of mathematics that her ancestors had created thousands of years ago. The hallway outside her door was already busy with students heading to breakfast. Lyra waited by her door, listening to the voices and footsteps. She had learned to recognize the different sounds each species made when they walked. The Thaxians sounded like thunder with their heavy boots. The Zephyrites moved in perfect sync, their feet hitting the floor at exactly the same time. The Eldari glided almost silently, their soft shoes barely making any noise at all. When the hallway got quieter, Lyra opened her door and stepped out. She kept her head down and walked quickly toward the academy section. The sooner she got to class, the less chance she had of running into the groups of students who liked to make her life difficult. But luck wasn't on her side today. As she turned the corner near the main classroom area, she saw them. 5 Thaxian students were standing in a circle, laughing loudly about something. Their leader, a massive guy named Brock, spotted her immediately. "Look what we have here," Brock called out, his voice booming across the hallway. "It's the little blue ghost." Lyra tried to walk past them, but they spread out, blocking her path. Other students in the hallway stopped to watch. Some looked uncomfortable, but none of them said anything. They never did. "Where are you going so fast, Crystal Girl?" another Thaxian asked. "Don't you want to talk to us?" Lyra pressed her data pad closer to her chest. Inside it was her latest mathematical poem, something she had spent 3 weeks perfecting. It was about hope, written in equations that described the probability of finding light in darkness. She had planned to share it with her literature teacher, the only person on the station who had ever shown any interest in her culture. "We heard your people got kicked off another planet last month," Brock said, stepping closer. "How many homes have you lost now? 3? 4? The words hit Lyra like physical blows. Her people, the Vithani, had indeed lost their original homeworld decades ago. They were what the galaxy called refugees now, scattered across different planets and space stations, trying to rebuild their civilization, one small community at a time. It wasn't their fault that they weren't warriors, like the Thaxians, or connected like the Zephyrites. They were artists, mathematicians, and philosophers. But in a galaxy that respected strength above all else, those qualities meant nothing. Maybe if your people learned how to fight instead of playing with numbers all day, you'd still have a home, one of the other Thaxians added. Lyra felt her skin shimmer brighter blue, which only happened when she was extremely upset. The Thaxian noticed immediately and started laughing louder. "Look, she's changing colors," Brock pointed out. "Like a mood ring. I wonder what purple means." Other species had joined the audience now. A group of Zephyrites stood nearby, their shared consciousness allowing them to communicate without speaking. Lyra had tried to connect with them when she first arrived, but they had rejected her immediately. They said her mind was too fractured, an individual to join their mental network. Even some Eldari students were watching from a distance. The Eldari were supposed to be the wise, peaceful ones in the galactic community, but Lyra had overheard them talking about her people just last week. saying the Vithani were a dying species that should just accept their fate, instead of trying to preserve their culture. The crowd was getting bigger, and Lyra felt trapped. She looked around desperately for a teacher or security guard, but the hallway was filled only with students. Her hands were shaking now, and she was afraid she might drop her datapad. That's when she spotted her escape route. There was a maintenance corridor about 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a support beam. If she could just get there without anyone following her, she could disappear into the maze of service tunnels that ran throughout the station. Lyra took a deep breath and pushed past the Thaxians, ignoring their surprised shouts. She ran toward the maintenance door, her soft shoes silent on the metal floor. Behind her, she could hear Brock yelling something, but she didn't stop to listen. The maintenance corridor was dark and warm, filled with the constant humming of the station's life support systems. Lyra found a quiet corner behind some large machinery and sat down on the floor. Here, surrounded by pipes and electrical panels, she finally felt safe. She opened her datapad and looked at her mathematical poem again. The equations were still beautiful, still meaningful, even if no one else would ever understand them. This was her refuge, her connection to a culture that the rest of the galaxy had written off as irrelevant. Lyra began working on a new poem, one about loneliness and the mathematics of being invisible. She had no idea that everything was about to change. Tom Bradley was still getting used to life on Kepler Station. 3 weeks wasn't nearly enough time to understand all the complex social rules that governed how dozens of different alien species interacted with each other. Back home in Manchester, things were simpler. You had your friends, you had people you didn't like, and you had strangers. Here, everything seemed to revolve around which species was stronger, smarter, or more important in the galactic hierarchy. He had noticed Lyra from his first day at the academy. She was hard to miss, with her shimmering blue skin and the way she seemed to glide through the hallways like she was trying not to disturb the air around her. But what really caught his attention was how alone she always seemed. In a station filled with thousands of beings, she moved through crowds like she was invisible. Tom had tried to introduce himself a few times, but every attempt ended the same way. Lyra would look startled, mumble something polite, and then disappear into the nearest crowd or corridor. His human classmates told him not to bother, that blue ones keep to themselves, said Jake, another exchange student from Earth. They're not really social like us. But Tom's grandmother had always taught him to pay attention to the quiet ones. The person sitting alone in the corner often has the most interesting stories to tell, she used to say while serving tea in her small Yorkshire kitchen. That advice had never failed him back on Earth. On this particular afternoon, Tom was heading to the library when he heard voices coming from the main common area. The space was designed to be a relaxing place where students from different species could hang out between classes. Comfortable seating areas were arranged around holographic displays, showing peaceful scenes from various homeworlds. What he saw when he walked in made his blood run cold. 5 Thaxian students had formed a circle around something on the floor. Their massive bodies blocked most of his view, but he could see glimpses of blue between their legs. Lyra was on her knees, desperately trying to gather up pieces of something that had been broken. "Clean it up faster, Crystal Girl," one of the Thaxians was saying. "You're making a mess in our common area." Tom moved closer and saw what they had destroyed. It was some kind of sculpture, but not like anything he had ever seen before. Instead of being carved from stone or molded from clay, this artwork seemed to be made entirely of mathematical equations that somehow formed 3-dimensional shapes in the air above a small projector base. The equations glowed with soft light, creating patterns that were both beautiful and complex. Now, those equations were scattered across the floor in broken pieces of crystal and twisted metal. Hours of work, maybe days, completely ruined. "Look at her," another Thaxian laughed. "She's about to cry over some stupid numbers. That's what her whole species does. The largest one, who Tom recognized as Brock from his engineering class, said loudly, "They play with math while real species build empires." Tom felt something his grandmother would have called righteous fury building in his chest. It started as a warm sensation near his heart and spread outward until his whole body felt energized and alert. This wasn't just bullying. This was the deliberate destruction of someone's art, someone's culture, someone's hope. Other students were walking through the common area, going about their daily business. A group of Eldari glanced over, saw what was happening, and quickly looked away. Some Zephyrite students actually stopped to watch, their collective consciousness apparently finding the scene entertaining. A few human students noticed the commotion, but kept walking, not wanting to get involved in alien business. Tom had spent 3 weeks learning that humans were considered the newcomers in galactic society. They weren't the strongest, the smartest, the most advanced, or the most numerous. Earth had only joined the galactic community 15 years ago, and humans were still trying to figure out where they fit in the complex web of interspecies politics. But right now, Tom didn't care about politics or hierarchies or fitting in. He cared about the fact that 5 massive bullies were tormenting someone who couldn't fight back. He walked straight toward the circle of Thaxians. His 5-foot frame looked tiny compared to their 7-foot heights, but he didn't hesitate. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the common area. The Thaxians turned around, looking confused. Brock squinted down at Tom like he was trying to figure out what species he was looking at. "What did you say, little pink thing?" Brock asked. "I said, that's enough," Tom repeated. He looked past the Thaxians to Lyra, who was staring up at him with wide, shocked eyes. "Are you okay? This doesn't concern you, human," another Thaxian said. "Go back to your own kind." Tom stepped closer, close enough that he had to crane his neck to look Brock in the eye. His grandmother had taught him another important lesson about bullies. They usually backed down when someone stood up to them, especially if that someone wasn't afraid. "You know what I see when I look at you," Tom said, his voice calm, but with an edge that made the Thaxians shift uncomfortably. "I see a bunch of cowards picking on someone half your size because you're too scared to face anyone who might fight back." The common area had gone quiet. Students from various species had stopped what they were doing to watch this confrontation between the tiny human and the massive Thaxian. "You think you're tough because you can destroy someone's artwork?" Tom continued. "Because you can make someone feel small? That doesn't make you strong. That makes you pathetic." Brock's face darkened with anger. "You want to see what strong looks like, human?" Tom didn't back down. Instead, he did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He smiled. "Try me," he said simply. For a long moment, nobody moved. The Thaxians looked at each other uncertainly. They had expected the human to run away or apologize. They hadn't expected this quiet confidence, this willingness to stand and fight despite being completely outmatched. Finally, Brock stepped back. "You're not worth our time," he muttered, as the Thaxians walked away. Tom knelt down next to Lyra and started helping her gather the broken pieces of her sculpture. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Don't thank me yet," Tom said. "Let's see if we can fix this thing." The repair session in Tom's quarters lasted until well past midnight. Lyra sat cross-legged on his floor, surrounded by the broken pieces of her mathematical sculpture, while Tom provided extra lighting and asked endless questions. What had started as a simple attempt to fix broken artwork had turned into something much deeper. "This equation here," Lyra said, pointing to a fragment that glowed with soft blue light, "represents the feeling you get when you see your home planet's sunrise, for the first time after being away for years." Her voice was quiet, but filled with emotion. "And this one describes the mathematics of missing someone you love." Tom leaned closer, genuinely fascinated. "So you're telling me that your people can express feelings through math? Like, actual Emotions have mathematical formulas. Everything has mathematical relationships, Lyra explained, her eyes lighting up for the first time since Tom had met her. Love, sadness, hope, fear. They all follow patterns that can be calculated and expressed in equations. When we combine those equations into sculptures like this one, we create poetry that you can see and touch. That's incredible, Tom said. And he meant it. Back on Earth, we write poems with words, or we paint pictures, or we compose music, but I've never heard of anyone turning emotions into math equations. Lyra's skin shimmered slightly, changing to a warmer shade of blue that Tom was beginning to recognize as happiness or comfort. Most species think we're just playing with numbers. They don't understand that mathematics is the language of the universe itself. When we create these sculptures, we're speaking directly to reality. Over the following days, their friendship grew in ways that surprised both of them. Tom would find Lyra in the library during lunch breaks, working on her mathematical poetry while eating alone. He started joining her, bringing sandwiches from the human section of the cafeteria, and listening to her explain the deeper meanings behind her work. Your species fascinates me, Lyra told him one afternoon, as they sat in the observation deck, watching the stars drift by outside the massive viewing windows. Humans have so many sayings about fighting and conflict. Pick your battles, stand your ground, never give up without a fight. Your entire language seems built around the idea of struggle. Tom laughed, remembering his grandmother's kitchen back in Manchester, where the walls were covered with little plaques containing various bits of folk wisdom. My Nan always said that humans are stubborn by nature. She had this saying, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. What does that mean? Lyra asked, tilting her head in that curious way she had. It means that being small doesn't matter if you're willing to fight harder than the big guy, Tom explained. It's about heart, not size. Lyra was quiet for a moment, her large eyes reflecting, the starlight streaming through the observation windows. Your species has many such sayings about conflict. Mine has equations for harmony. We have mathematical formulas that describe perfect balance, peaceful coexistence, the beauty of working together instead of fighting. Maybe that's exactly what makes us a good team, Tom replied. Your people know how to find peace. Mine know how to fight for it. Word of their unusual friendship spread through Kepler Station faster than Tom had expected. In a community where social hierarchies were rigid and species rarely mixed outside of official academy functions, a human and a Vithani spending time together was definitely noteworthy. The reactions were mixed and often predictable. Jake and the other human exchange students thought Tom was wasting his time. You should be making connections with the important species, Jake told him during their weekly Earth culture meeting. The Eldari control most of the academic institutions. The Zephyrites run the major trade networks. What's the point of befriending someone whose species doesn't have any political power? The alien students had their own opinions. Some found it curious that the unremarkable humans would befriend the defeated Vithani. Birds of a feather, Tom overheard a Eldari student saying to her friends. The weak naturally gravitate toward each other. Others saw it as confirmation that both species were equally worthless in the galactic hierarchy. The Thaxians, still angry about Tom's intervention, spread rumors that humans were just as pathetic as the Vithani, which is why they got along so well. But Tom discovered something interesting during those weeks of friendship. The more time he spent with Lyra, the more he learned about her people's actual history. The Vithani hadn't lost their homeworld because they were weak or cowardly. They had lost it because they refused to use weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations, even when their enemies had no such moral restrictions. We could have won the war, Lyra told him one evening, as they worked together on a new mathematical sculpture in the abandoned art studio. Our scientists had developed weapons that could have destroyed entire star systems, but the Council of Equations decided that victory achieved through such means would be mathematically meaningless. A solution that destroys the problem isn't really a solution at all. So you chose to lose, rather than become monsters, Tom said quietly. We chose to remain who we are, Lyra corrected him. Even if it meant exile. Tom felt that familiar surge of respect and protective anger. Back on Earth, they had a word for people like the Vithani, honorable. It was a concept that seemed to be in short supply in the wider galaxy, where might typically made right and the strong preyed on the weak without consequence. As their friendship deepened, Tom began to understand why Lyra's mathematical poetry was so important to her. Each sculpture wasn't just art, it was a piece of her people's soul, a reminder that beauty and meaning could exist even in the darkest circumstances. And every time someone like Brock destroyed one of her creations, they were trying to erase not just her work, but her culture's entire way of understanding the universe. Tom made a decision that would change everything. He wasn't going to let that happen anymore. The message had seemed innocent enough when it appeared on Tom's personal communicator during dinner. Meet me in hydroponic space 7 after night cycle begins. Need to show you something important about the station's botanical systems. Academic. Supervisor Chen. Tom should have been suspicious. Academic Supervisor Chen taught xenobiology, not hydroponics. And why would she want to meet in an abandoned section of the station? But he had been distracted, thinking about the new mathematical sculpture he and Lyra were working on together. The piece was supposed to represent the concept of friendship across species barriers, and they had been struggling with the equations for weeks. Lyra had received a similar message, supposedly from her literature instructor, asking her to meet in the same location to discuss a special project involving Vithani cultural preservation. Like Tom, she hadn't questioned it too closely. Teachers sometimes made strange requests, and she was always eager to talk about her people's traditions with anyone who showed genuine interest. The hydroponics bay was located in one of the older sections of Kepler Station, where the corridors were narrower and the lighting was dimmer. Most of the growing chambers in this area had been shut down years ago, when the station upgraded to more efficient food production systems. Now the space was mostly used for storage and maintenance work. Tom arrived first, pushing through the heavy doors into the humid, plant-filled darkness. The air smelled of earth and growing things, but underneath that was the metallic scent of recycled atmosphere and old machinery. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly green glow that made shadows dance between the abandoned growing tanks. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing strangely in the large space. "Supervisor Chen, are you here?" A rustling sound from deeper in the bay made him turn around, but instead of his teacher, he saw Lyra emerging from behind a row of empty hydroponic containers. Her blue skin looked almost gray under the strange lighting, and her eyes were wide with confusion. "Tom, what are you doing here?" she asked. "I was supposed to meet Instructor Davis about a cultural project. I got a message from Supervisor Chen," Tom replied, feeling the first stirrings of unease in his stomach. "She wanted to show me something about botanical systems." They looked at each other for a moment, both realizing at the same time that something was very wrong. That's when they heard the sound of heavy doors sealing shut behind them, followed by the mechanical whir of the locking mechanism engaging. Well, a familiar voice boomed from the shadows. "Look what we caught in our little trap." 8 figures stepped out from various hiding places around the hydroponics bay. Tom recognized most of them immediately. Brock and 2 other Thaxian, from his engineering classes. A group of 3 Zephyrite who moved in perfect synchronization, their shared consciousness allowing them to coordinate their actions without speaking. 2 Eldari students who had always looked down on humans, and Vithani, with barely concealed disgust. "Time to learn your place," the lead Zephyrite said, its mental voice somehow projecting directly into Tom and Lyra's minds, with a sensation like ice water being poured over their brains. The collective consciousness of its species carried undertones, of hatred and superiority that made Tom's teeth ache. "You thought you could embarrass us and get away with it," Brock added, his massive frame blocking any path toward the sealed doors. "You thought you could disrupt the natural order and face no consequences." Tom positioned himself between the 8 attackers and Lyra, his mind racing through possibilities. The math was simple and brutal. He wasn't stronger than any of them individually, and he definitely wasn't stronger than all of them together. Thaxians were natural warriors with bone density twice that of humans. Sephirites could coordinate their attacks with telepathic precision. Even the supposedly peaceful Eldari had physical advantages in terms of speed and reflexes. But as his grandmother used to say, strength wasn't the only factor that mattered in a fight. Sometimes the most important thing was simply being too stubborn to quit. Tom's eyes swept the hydroponics bay, taking inventory of everything that could be used as a weapon or advantage. Lengths of metal tubing from the old growing systems, chemical containers for plant nutrients, electrical panels that could be torn open and weaponized, the abandoned hydroponic tanks themselves, which could provide cover or be turned into obstacles. Behind him, he could feel Lyra trembling with fear. Her people weren't fighters. They were artists and mathematicians and philosophers. Violence went against everything their culture stood for. But Tom came from a species that had crawled out of caves and built civilizations through sheer, bloody-minded refusal to give up in the face of impossible odds. He reached out and grabbed a length of metal tubing from a nearby support structure, testing its weight in his hands. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. The 8 aliens began to close in, confident in their overwhelming advantage. Tom looked at each of them in turn, his expression calm, despite the adrenaline pumping through his system. Then he smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had decided that if he was going down, he was going to make his enemies pay dearly for the privilege. "You want to know what humans are really good at?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly through the humid air of the hydroponics bay. "We're not the strongest species in the galaxy. We're not the smartest or the fastest or the most advanced, but we are really, really good at one thing." He shifted his grip on the metal tube and took a step forward. "We're good at making the other guy regret starting something." The first Thaxian charged at him with a roar of anger, and Tom discovered just how much fight he really had in him. The security team found them 3 hours later. Tom was sitting against the wall of the hydroponics bay, his shirt torn and his knuckles bloody, but he was conscious and alert. Lyra sat beside him, her blue skin shimmering with stress patterns, but she was unharmed. Around them, the abandoned growing facility looked like a war zone. Metal tubing was scattered everywhere. Several of the old hydroponic tanks had been overturned and used as barricades. Chemical containers were dented and leaking nutrient solutions across the floor. One of the electrical panels had been completely torn open, its wires hanging loose like mechanical intestines. But the most telling evidence was the trail of destruction that led from the sealed entrance to various hiding spots throughout the bay. It told the story of a running battle where someone small and clever had used the environment itself as a weapon against larger, stronger opponents. Security Chief Rodriguez found 8 other students in various states of injury and confusion in different parts of the station. The Thaxians were in the medical bay, nursing bruises and what appeared to be chemical burns from plant fertilizer. The Zephirites were in the psychiatric ward, their collective consciousness somehow scrambled and unable to reconnect properly. The 2 Eldari had been discovered wandering the corridors in a daze, muttering about impossible human tactics and psychological warfare. Word spread through Kepler Station faster than a computer virus. By the next morning, every student, teacher, and administrator knew about the incident in the hydroponics bay. The details grew more dramatic with each telling, but the basic facts remained the same. 1 human student had fought off 8 attackers and won. But what really shocked the galactic community wasn't that Tom had fought. Violence wasn't uncommon. on the station, especially between different species who had historical conflicts. What stunned everyone was how he had fought, and more importantly, why. The security footage from the corridors leading to the hydroponic space showed Tom and Lyra arriving separately, both clearly expecting to meet teachers for legitimate academic purposes. The sealed doors and malfunctioning cameras proved that the attack had been carefully planned and coordinated. This wasn't a spontaneous fight or a case of mutual aggression. This was an ambush, plain and simple. Station Administrator Williams called both students to her office 2 days later. Her workspace was a testament to interspecies cooperation, with artifacts and artwork from dozens of different worlds decorating the walls. But her expression was serious as she reviewed the incident reports on her desk. "Mr. Bradley," she said, looking directly at Tom, "you've caused quite a stir throughout the station. Some species representatives are calling for your immediate expulsion. They claim that humans are naturally violent and don't belong in an academic environment." Tom sat up straighter in his chair. His face was still marked with bruises from the fight, but his eyes were steady and unrepentant. "Let them," he replied, simply. "I'd do it again tomorrow, if I had to." "You realize that statement doesn't help your case?" Administrator Williams asked. "I'm not trying to help my case," Tom said. "I'm trying to protect my friend. If that makes me a problem in your eyes, then maybe this station has bigger problems than one human student." Lyra, who had been silent during most of the meeting, suddenly spoke up. "Administrator Williams, Tom didn't start this fight. He didn't seek out conflict or try to prove human superiority. He was defending someone who couldn't defend herself. In my people's mathematics, that's called an optimal solution to an impossible equation." The investigation that followed Tom's hearing lasted 2 weeks and uncovered a systematic pattern of bullying that had been going on for months. Faculty members were called in to explain why they had ignored reports of harassment. Security staff had to account for mysteriously malfunctioning cameras and doors. Student after student came forward with their own stories of intimidation and abuse. What emerged was a picture of Kepler Station as a place where might made right, where stronger species preyed on weaker ones with virtual impunity, and where teachers and administrators looked the other way, because that's just how things work in the galaxy. The reforms came quickly after that. New anti-bullying protocols were established with real consequences for violations. Counselors trained in interspecies psychology were brought in to help students from different backgrounds understand each other better. Most importantly, the rigid social hierarchy that had governed student interactions began to crack under scrutiny. But the biggest change came from an unexpected source. 3 weeks after the incident, Lyra requested permission to address the Integrated Student Assembly. It was the first time in the station's history that a Vithani had asked to speak publicly to the entire student body. She stood at the podium in the main auditorium, her blue skin glowing softly under the stage lights, facing an audience of hundreds of students from dozens of different species. In her hands was a datapad containing her latest mathematical sculpture. But this one was different from all the others she had created. "For months," she began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the auditorium, "I have been working on a mathematical proof about the nature of strength, not physical strength or military power, but the kind of strength that holds communities together and makes civilizations worth preserving." She activated her datapad, and a holographic equation appeared above the stage. It was beautiful in its complexity, with flowing mathematical symbols that seemed to dance and interact with each other in three-dimensional space. "This equation describes the strength found in diversity," Lyra explained. "It shows how different variables, when combined properly, create solutions that no single variable could achieve alone. But the most important part of this proof isn't the mathematics itself." She paused and gestured to the bottom of the holographic display, where a small notation appeared in clear text, "Co-authored by T. Bradley, human." "The most important part," she continued, is understanding that some bonds cannot be calculated by traditional measures of strength or intelligence. They must be measured by the courage to stand, when standing costs everything. By the willingness to fight, not for dominance or territory, but for the simple principle that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. In the audience, Tom sat with the other human exchange students, watching his friend present their work to the assembled species of the galaxy. He felt a pride that had nothing to do with being human and everything to do with being Lyra's friend. My people have an old saying, Lyra concluded. The most elegant solution is often the simplest one, and sometimes the simplest solution is just one person deciding to do the right thing, regardless of the consequences. As applause filled the auditorium, from dozens of different species, Tom realized that something fundamental had changed on Kepler Station. It wasn't just the new rules, or the counselors, or the administrative reforms. It was the idea that had taken root in the minds of students throughout the station, that maybe, just maybe, there was a better way to treat each other. Sometimes the most important victories weren't about winning fights. They were about teaching everyone else how to fight for what was right.